Okay, this is lecture number 8, part 1, South Africa. South Africa is a fantastic example of how both Europeans and native populations often clashed for power. We will be talking about South Africa more extensively in the next lecture. However, in order to make sense of everything, I need to tell you a little bit about the early history of South Africa. South Africa is a very unique place in colonial African history. 3 different groups will become embroiled in a struggle for this territory. The first of these groups included the native South Africans, who were composed of many different Bantu-based tribes. There have been many migrations over thousands of years in Africa. One group of people who migrated during this time period included the Bantu peoples. Bantu peoples spread around the African continent. Consequently, many languages in Africa have Bantu roots. This doesn't mean they necessarily sound the same, but there are some definite structural similarities. So many tribes in South Africa in particular had similar Bantu lineages or links that resulted in common heritages. One of these groups that migrated into South Africa and displaced some of the other native groups included the Zulu. The Zulu often used military force to secure land and power, like Shaka. So the Zulu were definitely one group present in South Africa. Another group in South Africa who arrived during the 1600s as part of a religious exodus from the Netherlands were the Boers. The Dutch settlers fled the Netherlands in search of religious tolerance as part of the wider-scale Protestant Reformation period in Europe. Don't worry, you'll cover all this stuff in 10th grade. But the point here is that there were Dutch settlers who settled in South Africa near Cape Town, the same way that American Puritans sought religious tolerance in the early colonies in what we now call the U.S., right? Yeah, so these settlers didn't always get along with the native Africans they came into contact with. Sometimes the Dutch settlers forced these people into servitude. The Dutch established what became known as the Cape Colony in South Africa. Enter the British, who were vying for control of this part of Africa in the early 1800s. Yep, and the British didn't really like that the Dutch settlers were competing with them for control of the area. So they clashed with one another, and the British won control of the Cape Colony. The British tried to end slavery and had other ideological differences with the Dutch. The Boers, or the Dutch, disliked the new policies instituted by the British, and so they fled the territory to seek a new place to live. This retreat became known as the Great Trek, and many women and children lost their lives along the way. Many of the Dutch settlers never forgave the British for this and deeply resented their rule. The Boers set up 2 separate territories for themselves, the Orange Free State as well as the Transvaal. That's spelled Transvaal. Well, guess what? To complicate things even further for all of you listeners, there were already native black South Africans living in these places called the Zulu, and they certainly weren't too keen on having the Dutch resettle there. So guess what happened? They started to fight. So fighting broke out and lasted for a long time. Eventually, the British got involved as well, so we're going to see 3 groups of people fighting one another, and yada, 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 the British came out victorious versus the Zulu. And of course, once the British defeated the Zulu, they set their sights on the Boers, who were occupying land where diamonds and gold had been discovered. Yes, so the discovery of diamonds and gold in these Boer territories in 1867 and 1884, respectively, inspired yet another war, this one called the Boer War. In 1902, the British defeated the Boers in what became known as the Boer War. In 1910, the British established the Republic of South Africa. The Dutch and British colonists in South Africa will continue to live together, albeit with much animosity, for the next 38 years. Following World War II, South Africa gained its independence from the British, and the Boers, at that point referred to as the Afrikaners, or the white Africans, will take control of the newly independent nation and promptly institute a policy of segregation called apartheid, which lasted until 1994. But more on that later. Thanks for listening to Part 1.
Umbona nje ndilala nina le, umbona nje ndilala nina le.